Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Earle Wellbeing Show. Today's guest, Dr Harriet Holme, is an extra special one as she is one of the brilliant columnists that make up the Earle Wellbeing magazine family. And in an online world full of food fads and dietary misinformation, Harriet's medical training and science-backed information really caught my eye and sets her apart as a truly trusted voice in the field of nutrition. She was a paediatric doctor for over a decade, earning a PhD in cancer genetics along the way. She's now a fully qualified and registered nutritionist, having swapped medical practice for nutritional consultancy. And she is on a mission to make sure we are all eating well for our health. And if you would like to see Harriet and I in conversation, we have actually recorded it in vision, and you can catch this over on YouTube. As the healthy eating doctor on social media, Harriet is passionate about using the latest science and hard evidence to make sure the food we eat is doing us good and is incredibly tasty at the same time. Her background in medicine helps to provide dietary support for a number of conditions that span our whole lives, especially as women, from fertility to menopause and beyond. Since the birth of her beautiful children, Harriet has turned her eye to pregnancy and postpartum, publishing her brilliant new ebook, Postpartum Nutrition, an expert's guide to eating after a baby. And this is the topic we're going to be diving into today, alongside so much more. I do hope that you will share widely with any expectant mothers in your life. And also, we're talking about all aspects of nutrition and also some of the food intolerances and explaining some of the science behind that. There's so much that we can do to support our health and well-being, especially during a joyful but very exhausting and often challenging time, such as having had a baby. And we'll be looking at nutritional needs later in life too, for example, perimenopause and menopause, of course, pretty much covering what most, if not all, female healthcare needs to do in terms of what to eat and when. So without further ado, let's introduce Harriet. So, Harriet, you have had a really extraordinary career with your medical background and then sort of moving more into the nutritional world. How did that all come about? Why did you get so fascinated with nutrition?
I don't really think it was one thing. I think just sort of a number of things happened sort of after my children were born that made me reevaluate my career. And at the same time, having just completed my PhD in genetics, I found the sort of the new frontier of the microbiota and the microbiome really fascinating. And having worked in paediatric oncology, nutrition was a big part of that. And I just think the combination of those things really that I sort of felt at the time that I needed to step out of medicine, but I was really fascinated by nutrition, really interested in the science, the research. Having done my PhD in a laboratory, I loved doing that, and it gave me an insight into sort of, animal studies, cellular studies, interpreting the papers, the research, how that translates into humans. So I guess it gives me a different perspective, sort of more health medical perspective in many ways. But I love this. I love the science. I like helping people. It just sort of fitted really well, to be honest. So it's the right step.
You are that lovely, refreshing, rare breed, I think, of almost the kind of the new wave of nutritionists who have that really solid, evidence-based medical background.
Thank you.
Because they do say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And, I'm sure, you and me both, we have seen so many well-intentioned, really well-meaning, nutritionists, in inverted commas. And I don't pretend to get it because I'm not a doctor and I'm not a medic. But, can often just get it that little bit wrong and not fully understand the ways the body works. And I think the fact that we can throw in that you're a geneticist and have studied all of that as well, or, deeply studied the academia of the genetic profile and what's happening in the microbiome is so fascinating to bring it all together.
So I'm not technically a geneticist, if you do a specific type of doctor that's a geneticist, but certainly doing my PhD was all on the genetics of a very rare type of bone cancer and overlapped a bit with breast cancer. And I did that all in the laboratory where BRCA2 was discovered. It was a really inspiring place, and I loved learning about the genetics, and I do think that's really has shaped how I view things now. But as you say, it's given me a really that sort of science, but breaking that science down to people so that it's accessible and they understand it, because there are so many people out there that are claim to be nutritionists but have no recognized qualifications and lots of nutrition.
No, that's the crazy thing.
And it's only if you're a registered nutritionist that are you part of a professional body, and is there any regulation on qualifications. So I think it's quite horrifying in that regard that anyone can just with 5 minutes.
And also, not only that with nutritionists, but even doctors, and you see it all the time, people putting the word doctor in front of their name when actually they're not a medical doctor. They haven't been to medical school. They're a PhD doctorate. But, you take that word doctor and you go and, get some fancy room somewhere in Harley Street or whatever, and everyone thinks, oh, doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very true. Very true.
It must be very frustrating for the real deal like you to kind of, be working potentially, alongside others. And I think, I would certainly like to see, anybody who uses the word doctor in a medical setting to actually be regulated in a way that you're covered by the GMC. You've been to medical school and, you're able to practice medicine, I guess, in the broader sense. But that's just a personal bugbear of mine. Anyway, welcome to my team. It's lovely to have you here.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
And I think one of the things that also really struck me when I was looking at your work is how female focused you are. And, you talk about working with mums and babies and obviously your research with breast cancer. It really seems to me that what shines through is how best to enable women to get the most out of their nutrition and their nutritional needs at whatever stage of life, whether it's, younger women going through perhaps their first pregnancy, through to postpartum, breastfeeding, beyond. And then as we go through life, we get into perimenopause and menopause. And, you've written about all of that, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sort of a bit of an unmet need in many ways. And I think those sort of times in life where it's particularly stressful for people, whether you're trying for a baby, there's so much information out there on the internet, how do you know what's credible? And certainly as a mother myself of 2 children, when both of mine had cow's milk protein allergy, despite being a paediatrician, I found it difficult to access some of the information that I needed at the time. So I just really wanted to provide a sort of source of credible, well-researched, evidence-based, up to date with the latest guidelines, information for all of those different, points in the journey, through our lives, really. So I think that was my intention, to help people, optimize their health at those different life stages.
And there's nothing like being personally invested. You talk about yourself with your babies having issues with feeding. And, for me, when I think, my eldest daughter, Lily, she's now at the time of recording this, nearly hitting 30. Wow. And for me, that was the when I was pregnant with her, 30 years ago, that was really the driving force for me. I wanted to know that I was eating the most healthy things, the best things that I could to support a new growing human, and then beyond. And I guess that, partly what, fueled my interest right at the beginning. And in fact, your recent book that's just come out is specifically on that early stage. So should we go through chronologically? Should we kind of start with some pointers here, perhaps for new mums? And let's begin it almost at the beginning of womanhood, perhaps for some women.
Yes, absolutely. My new book's all on postpartum nutrition, and that sort of early stage when you're a new mum, and just trying to sort of guide you to sort of optimize, their health, really. And I think it can be a bit of a forgotten time. You're so focused on your precious new baby that in some ways the sort of mum's a bit forgotten. And it's tricky, there's no doubt, especially if you've got a toddler and they're running around trying to make nutritious food is really difficult. It's also a time when you're tired and exhausted and stressed potentially, and that, trying to sort of be empowered to make those healthy choices, and grab a healthy snack as opposed to, you know, a chocolate bar, is important, is really important, actually, I think. And there's lots of evidence about sort of bi-directional relationship between stress and nutrition. So if you're stressed and tired, not only on a sort of mindful psychological level are you more likely to reach that chocolate bar, but also that there's actually communication between the brain and the gut. The brain affects what you actually end up eating, and what you eat affects your mood. So there's sort of so many different levels of it, and how really just to help support new mums, give them the information they need so they can make those healthy choices. And if they're breastfeeding, that they need extra calcium and iodine, and that just to show them really what that looks like. So I think it's really abstract concept, you know, if you're just told you need 1,250 milligrams of calcium, what on earth does that mean? You know, what does it look like? How do I incorporate that into my diet? Do I need all the different supplements that people are trying to sell me the whole time? How can I look after my gut health? All of those kind of things, really. How to sort of, you need, you know, how to increase your fibre. And then I often asked about, you know, sort of how do you get your body back after having a baby? And I think lots of people think that sort of celebrities out there, you know, they ping straight back, and why haven't I? And some information about that. How, first of all, I think, you know, it's not natural to ping straight back. It's great if you do, but most women don't. And that, you know,
it took 9 months to get there. It's going to take at least 9 months to get back again, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then just about really sort of sustainable ways of, you know, getting your fitness back, you know, maybe losing weight slowly, but in a sustainable manner, that's healthy, and really about making those healthy long-term choices. So it's not a quick fix. It's not a crash diet. It's just about, you know, choosing to eat mindfully, eating well, how to support that.
Yeah, all these messages that we're told. And I think what I'd like to pick up there is something that you mentioned really early on, which is almost a sort of a forgotten nutrient in many ways, and that was iodine. And interesting that you talk specifically about the women's needs for iodine going up during breastfeeding. And yet it can be quite hard to find iodine in foods, can't it? What sort of things do you recommend?
So it's mainly in things like fish and dairy. And so that's, I think, why it's a particularly important nutrient for mums that have had to, or are either vegan by choice or have had to exclude dairy because of their baby's got calcium protein allergy. So calcium and iodine then are really hard to come by if you're vegan. And I think mums need to be supported to know that they might need to supplement, or how to get that naturally. That actually now there are a couple of plant-based milks actually are fortified with not only calcium but also iodine. And that's a fairly new thing really within the last year, that the iodine's been added.
Really?
I think, you know, knowing those things, it's really easy then to think, oh, right, I need a bit of extra iodine. I'm not getting that in my diet because I'm vegan, or I'm, you know, very excluding, or actually I just don't drink much or eat much of, you know, products with them in. And knowing then that, all right, if I have, you know, a glass or this or that of plant-based milk, choosing one with the iodine, that I can, you know, meet my micronutrient needs and look after my long-term health.
Interesting. Why is iodine so important? You know, particularly you mentioned during breastfeeding. What's iodine actually doing in a woman's body?
So iodine has got a number of different so a number of different functions, including looking after brain health, thyroid. So it's got a number of different functions, and if you don't have enough, you're more likely to have fatigue and be tired. So I think, you know, they're quite sort of nebulous symptoms. You're not going to be like, oh, I've got an iodine deficiency. You're probably more to think, I'm a tired new mum.
Yeah, so, for sure. Yeah.
That's why it's, you know, can often be a bit of a sort of forgotten one. Calcium is probably more and iron people are more worried about, normally at the sort of forefront of people's mind. But that's why I think it's really important to know what you should be getting, what you need, so that you're sure then that tiredness is just because your baby kept you up all night, not
not for anything else. Yeah. I remember talking to an orthopedic specialist about calcium and bones during pregnancy, and saying that each pregnancy the baby takes 5% of your calcium from your skeleton, from the mum's bone. that's how the baby makes its own bones, his or her own bones, through robbing the mum of the calcium. So I was kind of sitting there doing the maths, talking to him and saying, well, I've had 5 children.
Wow.
So does that mean that I've lost 25% of the calcium in my bones? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, yes. So it's like, that's a shocker. I mean, I am very careful. I mean, I do eat a lot of dairy products and cheese and things. So, from that point of view, I think I'm probably getting my calcium, but nobody had actually spelt it out in such graphic terms. And of course, as we age, we know that osteoporosis is such not only a debilitating disease, but a killer for women.
Absolutely.
And we need to be banking our calcium, don't we? Because don't we lose our ability to bank calcium beyond our sort of late 20s?
So just to say, there's certainly a lot of mixed evidence about calcium. Some people think that you absolutely don't need more during breastfeeding, but there is good evidence that you do need more during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and that while your baby might leach some of the calcium out and take it while they're in utero and during breastfeeding, that you can catch up your calcium once they've weaned and once you're no longer doing that. But I think so that might hold, but it's really difficult to know, and therefore I think that you should be supporting your own micronutrient needs while you're pregnant, while you're breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And that, yes, calcium is super important for bone health. You need it all through your life, and also you need to be doing resistance training, exercise, because without that, you can have all the calcium in the world, but without exercise, resistance training exercise, it's just not going to keep your bones.
So how is that working then? I can kind of understand if we eat calcium, it gets through its sort of magical migration into the bones. How is exercise in particular creating more of this mineral within the bone? So
I'm no exercise specialist, but I think it's all to do with remodeling of bone. That bone is constant. There are different types of cells, osteoclast and the osteoblast, that are constantly remodeling your bone. So they're constantly removing bone and laying it down, and exercise helps stimulate that. And it's that process of remodeling and keeping them essentially keeping the strength within them that enables you to reduce your risk of osteoporosis. That it's constantly using them, and it's using them with forces against them. So like aerobic activity doesn't stimulate the forces that you need. So you need opposing forces, which is why you need the resistance training.
That's so fascinating, isn't it? It's specifically resistance. So it's this kind of push-pull, using your own body weight with its push-ups, or, I mean, women I know in midlife take up weightlifting, to get that kind of resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's really important, especially post-menopausal, as well as eating, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, which you should be able to through any, well-balanced diet. That resistance training, that exercise is really important, especially post-menopausal.
Yeah. Let's come back to what you were saying about having a child dairy intolerant. And, this is sort of front of mind for me because one of my boys is lactose intolerant. And so I'm aware of the milk sugar, and I've done quite a bit of writing on that, and about how you can still, in many cases, still have kefir, for example, one of my favorite foods, because the bacteria there are digesting the lactose. That's what they're feeding. So the time we have it, it's virtually lactose free in some cases. But what I'm less sure about, and I'd love you to talk us through this, are the different types of intolerances, because not only is there lactose intolerance, but there's also casein intolerance. And can you explain what casein is, and the kind of the differences, and how we could tell, perhaps?
So there are lots of different types of dairy allergy. So first of all, if I sort of think of it in sort of chronological order, so milk is made up of proteins and fat. The fat is not really allergenic; it's just the proteins, and that's your casein, albumin, and whey. But there's a specific protein called a cow's milk protein, and that is what most babies are allergic to. So if your baby's got a dairy allergy, they're allergic to the cow's milk protein itself. And doesn't matter if you take lactose-free milk, because it's not the lactase that they're allergic to. They're allergic to the actual protein. So they're allergic to the cow's milk protein, which is
That's
why...
really fascinating. I mean, I don't think that is fully understood. I think a lot of people think, oh, dairy intolerance, there you go, I'll just buy lactose free.
Yeah,
but, from what you're saying, that's not actually the issue.
No, so in their milk, there's a sugar called lactose, and that is broken down by an enzyme that we naturally have in our body. Some people have less of it and some people have none, and that's called lactase. Lactase breaks down lactose, and if you're unable to break that down yourself, then you get the sort of bloating, wind, all of those symptoms. And so that's really more of a sort of adult thing that people
Right.
have. That you don't see that commonly in babies. And if you have then the sort of lactose-free milk, then
Yes.
your symptoms will go, because your body's not having any problem, that's not causing any symptoms, any problems. So
Right.
to go back to the cow's milk protein allergy, the actual sort of the physical properties of the protein cause the allergy or stimulate an allergic response. And the physical shape of it is actually really similar to soya protein. And so that's why 50% of babies with cow's milk protein allergy will also have an allergy to soya, because of the physical properties of it, because it looks very similar and causes that allergenic response. And that's why also you can't just substitute cow's milk for, say, goat's milk, because the proteins are very similar and will cause the same reaction.
Right.
And then of those reactions, you can either have what's called an IgE-mediated reaction, which is like a sort of anaphylactoid, immediate. You get the sort of breathlessness, swelling, hives, rash. Very like if you have a sort of classic peanut reaction. Or you can have what's called a non-IgE-mediated reaction, which is a slower reaction. It happens sort of more after 24 hours. You sort of can get like sort of mucousy stool, blood in the stool, gut pain, eczema, those kind of things. So,
and that could be down to the casein.
That's the actual the cow's milk protein. Yeah.
And is this something that babies tend to grow out of?
Yeah, so 90% of babies will grow out of by the time they're 5.
Right. Oh, interesting. So then you would sort of have an exclusion, perhaps, obviously under supervision.
Yeah.
But start reintroducing foods containing casein.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'd reintroduce foods containing dairy, and you go up a sort of allergenic ladder. It's called the dairy ladder, where you start
talk
off
us
with
through the allergenic ladder. I like the sound of that.
So you start off with cooked dairy, very low quantities of cooked dairy in, say, for example, like a biscuit, and because that's got hardly any dairy in it at all. And as you go up, you go sort of muffin, cake, and then sort of like scrambled egg with some milk in it, or a pancake where the dairy's not very cooked, right up to sort of ice cream, yogurt, and then right at the top is, milk, really, because it's full of the protein, and it's also raw. It's uncooked. It might be pasteurized, but it's not cooked. So cooking denatures the protein, it unravels them, and so it's much less likely to cause an allergic reaction.
You could have a cooked milk pudding potentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why, like rice pudding or something that had been baked.
Yes, which is why, for example, butter doesn't contain much of the cow's milk protein in it, and if you have cooked butter, say in a croissant, lots of mums with a baby who's got cow's milk protein allergy could actually eat croissants, because they're very low allergenicity. So there you go.
Low allergenic croissant. I like the sound of that. The other thing that I'm hearing quite a bit about, and this is sort of to do, I guess, with my work writing about supporting the immune system, is something called Lactoferrin. And what is that, and how does that play into all of this?
So Lactoferrin is normally a component in breast milk, which helps iron absorption, and it's just a sort of transport protein, really. But it's one of the reasons why iron is better absorbed from breast milk than it is, say, from formula milk, because it's got the lactoferrin in it, and it also is thought to possibly have sort of antibacterial qualities because it reduces the amount of unbound iron in the gut, and bacteria like unbound iron. So
That's fascinating. I guess the clue is in the name, isn't it? Lacto, milk, ferrin, iron.
Yeah, iron.
Ferrous. I'm actually seeing a little bit of noise around lactoferrin supplements. I didn't realise it was only found in human breast milk.
Normally,
so presumably that's not something that that we're all enjoying later in life, and yet it still seems to have possibly interesting properties. I mean, I've seen it being promoted as sort of helping guard against flu and helping with the immune system.
So certainly do know that if you're iron deficient, you are more likely to have problems with your immune system. But you should, if you're iron replete, that's less likely. So I haven't seen those studies on lactoferrin. That'd be interesting to.
Yeah, I'm just hearing it. You know how you hear these things kind of percolating around, and just a few times I've spotted studies, or as I say, a little bit of noise around lactoferrin. I thought, oh, note to self, I need to have a look at this, especially as we're sort of surrounded by needing to support our immune system now, more than ever, in so many ways. So let's talk about allergies. We've talked about milk allergies there. Do you think there is this general rise in allergies amongst youngsters with having to exclude foods? Because certainly if you go into any supermarket, the free from aisle, free from lactose, gluten, whatever it is growing bigger by the day, it seems.
No, absolutely. I don't think there is evidence to support that allergies are vastly increasing. I think certainly the products are increasing, which is great. And if you have an allergy, it makes your life so much better and easier. And I mean, I developed allergy to gluten and dairy after a really severe episode of food poisoning back when I went to university, and there was nothing, gluten-free bread was on prescription, and it was really tough 20 years ago. So I think it's a really great thing that all of those choices are there now for people, whether they are vegan through choice or vegan because of allergy or have got other problems. But certainly we know that breastfeeding reduces the risk of things like asthma and wheeze later in life. There's not the same link there with food allergies, so I don't think it's because of breastfeeding rates or anything like that. But I think it's probably just it's better diagnosed. People are able to, more aware. Yeah.
Interesting, you talk about the gut. That kind of leads us inevitably onto the microbiome, which is, I think, the conversations that I always seem to end up, because everything comes back to the gut, doesn't it? All roads leading to Rome, every health issue comes back to the gut. Interesting to say that you had a bad bout of food poisoning that then led to a gluten sensitivity. Are we seeing more of that actually getting our guts back in shape following an incident like that can actually help with gluten intolerance or lactose intolerance? So rather than automatically having to run to the free from aisle for the rest of our lives, we can actually get a healthy gut back with a bit of gut health.
Yeah, so certainly there's good evidence. So when children often have diarrhea and vomiting, they will often have a temporary lactose intolerance. And if you sort of give up dairy in them for a few days, then after that it should recover their microbiome to get back to normal and be able to digest it again. And the sort of, I don't know about gluten, but certainly gut health. I think there's so much more to find out about gut health, how you recover gut health post antibiotics, post infection. There's so much more research to be done on it. There's so much, I think, more to learn about it, really.
What do you do at home, for your gut health and for your children now? Do you have certain things that we'll always find in your fridge or your cupboards?
So for me personally, I love kefir. My children will love kefir. I like kombucha, the low sugar, high bacterial quantity.
Make any of this yourself?
So I have two really little children, and I don't have time to make kombucha, to be honest. I've just not got my life sorted quite to that degree. It's a goal, and I've watched you make kefir a number of times, and it's a goal. One day I'll I'll try and achieve that, but not at the moment. And
And do
then
your children have it? Do they enjoy that as well?
they're fine with, they like kefir. Kombucha, they're not so keen on. And then I love raw slaw. I love the hurly-burly. I don't know if you tried hurly-burly, but I love.
No, what's hurly-burly? Is that like a sauerkraut type thing?
Yeah, raw fermented slaw. I just love the umami, tangy taste of it all.
Yeah,
So,
a bit of kimchi.
yeah,
Delicious.
kimchi, those, eating, fruit and vegetables, whole grains, all of those. I like. My children are variable on it. They won't eat kimchi or sauerkraut, but they're only 5 and 2. So
Oh, yeah, bear
I
with
think
them.
they've got to acquire those tastes
And
years
what
to
about
come.
thinking about little ones and growing up and brain development, both in youngsters and also as we age, the importance of the omega-3s,
Mm.
the EPA and the DHA, the short chain and the long chain essential fatty acids. How do you recommend that we get those into our diets? Are you a fan of supplementation?
So I think there has been evidence that support that the whole food effect of eating omega-3 is certainly better than supplements. So that if you can eat, that whole foods that contain those, that's better. So things like salmon, we have salmon, and oily fish, we have that twice a week. I make my breakfast oats with chia seeds, and the kids have chia seeds in pancakes and sprinkled on things. So just another way of getting them in. And I think if you're vegan and you're struggling to get them in, because it's a lot harder with just plant-based sources of omega-3, then supplements then have a role. But I think if you can aim to do that whole food first, whole food first.
I think we're understanding more and more, aren't we, that there are certain supplements that are really necessary. And it was funny, in the early days I was a big fan of supplements. I'm going back decades here, I guess, when they first started to be talked about, and I thought, these are fabulous, this is all the magic answer to everything, just swallow some pills and then eat what we like. And then really, I guess, I'm almost swinging right away from that. I went through a phase where I didn't take anything at all and was just trying to get everything from food and cook from scratch and all that, which I still try and do for the most part. But I think there are some cases, aren't there, where, like vitamin D, for example, potentially iodine, potentially, as you say, the omega-3s, if you're a plant-based eater, that we just need to be aware of what we're topping up with.
Absolutely. So I'm a big fan of trying to get your micronutrients through food where possible, and trying to avoid supplements as well, where possible. But there are certain circumstances where you absolutely need them. So vitamin D, in England, we live somewhere where there's not much sun for autumn and winter, and it's certainly NHS guidance to take your vitamin D supplement. If you're pregnant, you need folate, and if you're vegan, then you will almost certainly need a B12 supplement. And then, there will be other people that need different things, but those are sort of the big 3 that I always think of.
And I think that the other things that I've learned over the years is eating whole food. The nutrients are more than just single substances, aren't they? They're so bound up with all these other available compounds, and they work synergistically with other things. So you get so much more out of eating, say, a cabbage leaf than you do from just taking a vitamin K supplement. And also what you eat it with, the fact that you need a bit of fat and oil to absorb it.
Absolutely. No, I agree entirely. And also just things like, people sort of often, I think, have heard that, fruit's really bad for you because it's got sugar in it. But actually, the difference between a tablespoon of sugar, or teaspoon or whatever of sugar, and having naturally occurring sugar in fruit, is that the fruit's bound up with water, it's bound up with fibre, which is good for your gut health. It's got all those polyphenol compounds which make it those lovely bright colours, which are antioxidants. So it's so much more than a bit of sugar for energy. So,
yeah. Although, having said that, I know that you are, like me, pretty hard nosed when it comes to the refined carbs. And they're not a kind of, let's shove it in on every meal. It's something, there's something to be watched out for, aren't they?
Absolutely, I agree wholeheartedly. Have whole grains where possible. I think the only exception to that really is children under 5, where the sort of guidance is that they shouldn't have 100% whole grains, just because it's increased bulk and fibre and can prevent them from getting enough of the micronutrients, because they've still got, a little tummy and can sort of fill them up prematurely. So it's sort of a gradual thing, get them onto whole grains 100% by the time they're 5, but there's a bit of flexibility there before that.
Yes.
But yeah, otherwise I agree, it's whole grains all the way where possible. But perhaps the occasional white rice when I'm having sushi or something.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, but sushi rice I heard is actually one of the good things, because it has all the resistant starch, because it's cold starch, and that's actually feed our little microbes.
Yeah, so starch changes when you absolutely. So if you cook pasta as well and you keep it in the fridge till the next day, then the starch becomes more resistant as well. So absolutely.
Yeah, and actually, that is a really good hack for people who are busy, because you can cook your pasta, particularly little pieces of pasta like penne or fusilli or whatever, and then just chuck them into a pot of boiling water to heat them up again really, really fast.
Yeah.
But you've also got more of the resistant starch, which is good for your gut bug.
Yeah.
Something else that I wanted to just chat about briefly, and I thought would be really interesting, given your background work with genetics, is this whole area of nutritional sort of epigenetics. And I recently had a genetic screening, my nutritional profile done, just out of interest for research. And I don't have the gene that converts beta carotene to retinol.
Mm-hmm.
So, now, for me, that's not an issue, because, as I say, I eat lots of, butter and cheese and meat and things. So I'm getting retinol anyway, naturally. But, for me, being a vegan would not be a good option, because I'm eating all this beta carotene, gaily thinking, oh, that's fine, because it's all converting into vitamin A in my body, without realizing that I don't actually have that gene. And isn't it interesting how modern nutrition seems to be taking a deep dive into how individually our nutritional needs are varied, and we process things differently, and what's right for me won't necessarily be right for you or your neighbour or your child even, potentially.
Yes, I agree entirely. I think it's a really fascinating area. I think there is important information to come out of it. I'm a bit cautious about sort of people's claims that they can predict your diet based on your genes, because that's certainly not the case, and there's no evidence to support that. But I think in sort of limited scenarios, so whether you don't metabolize and transport vitamin D, you need extra doses of it, or for example in your case, and there's sort of limited bits at the limited areas at the moment that we've got really good insight into, and that those are still important. I think it's an area that's going to expand hugely over the next 5-10 years, and it'll be really exciting to see that new information. Similar sort of to sort of sampling your microbiota, that some of the baseline, there's still lots more of the work to be done. There's lots more to be done about working out then how you replace it after antibiotics, how you change it, what the changes mean, how that why it modulates, all of those different things. I think it's sort of similar in many ways, with the sort of overlap of work, that sort of nutrition and where nutrition and genetics combine.
Yeah, and I think just realizing that we are all individual. And interestingly that you talk about vitamin D there. I had somebody in my family tested, and they were found to not be processing vitamin D very effectively. And actually they now need to be taking, rather than 1,000 units, between 9,000 and 10,000 units to actually get them up to the same level.
I'm one of those people as well. Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
And that is, and how did you find that, and when did you find it? Did you suspect it, or?
So I had my vitamin D levels done, and they were low despite taking vitamin D supplements.
Right.
And I think probably before, a few years ago, as a clinician, you'd have just thought they're not taking their supplements. But obviously I knew I was. So
you knew you were.
Yes. So I thought, this is a bit interesting. And so I did my genetics and discovered it. Yeah. So now I know that I need more. So yeah, that was, I think, really. So as I say, I think there's some really useful benefits to it. I just think it's a sort of I guess it's a spectrum of claims. So some really useful bits of it, but I think, we need to be really careful not to sort of overclaim, actually we can't predict your diet. We can't predict that you should be eating X, Y, and Z. You can just say that there's some limited things which are really important and do have profound, impact. But yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And certainly in terms of mental health and anxiety levels, looking at the pathways in the body of the vitamin D and how that's impacting on serotonin and dopamine and all of that. It's so fascinating.
Absolutely. So vitamin D, I think, is a cofactor for up to 20% of our genome, which is incredible. So
no way.
Yeah, it has profound effects. So having normal levels of vitamin D is important. I don't advocate taking huge amounts and overdoing it. I think just being vitamin D replete is important.
It's something. Well, maybe that's one of the small glimmers of good news to have come out of this awful year, is that vitamin D has sort of been thrust a little bit more into the spotlight, hasn't it, as we've become more aware of it. So it's certainly helping with our immune system. But if it has all these other benefits as well, then, and of course it's not really a vitamin, is it? It's more of a hormone.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's a really interesting vitamin, because it's got a lot of so for example, we don't understand why, but we know that vitamin D is linked to lung function, which I think is quite interesting, that just by taking vitamin D you can improve your lung function if you've got a chronic lung disease. So patients with, for example, cystic fibrosis or other chronic lung disease, their lung function improves just by taking vitamin D, and there's clear association there. We don't know the mechanism, but vitamin D, it's a very interesting molecule. There's lots to say. Who knows whether it might have I think there's lots more research to be done on vitamin D and COVID as well. Lots more to understand. So
yeah, for sure. Honestly, it is such a great pleasure to welcome you to our family here. Thank you for kind of hopping onto the pod for this little exploratory romp through so many sort of life stages. And, we've touched on so many different things, and I know that there's so much that we will continue to chat about, and it's really great that you can come on here. I hope that you'll join me again many more times just to bring this to life, and we look forward to your regular columns in Is Iodine Wellbeing magazine.
Thank you. It's very exciting. I'm really delighted to be part of it, so thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and go well and get back to your babies.
Thank you,
Harriet.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
And that's it for today's episode. As always, you will find all the links and the resources that Harriet and I mentioned on today's show over on lizarwellbeing.com. There you can sign up for the free weekly newsletter, and it's jam-packed with plenty of expert advice on women's health with experts like Harriet. Huge thanks, of course, to all of you who leave us such lovely reviews, especially on iTunes. It really does help others to find the show, and so many find it really beneficial. So until the next time we chat, go well. Don't forget your vitamins. Bye-bye. The Liz Earle Wellbeing Show is presented by me, Liz Earle, with production by Amaryllis Earle and Harry Trevithick at Heart Dialogue, with thanks to my producer, Ellie Smith, guest booker, Millie de la Morinière, and assistant researcher, Martha Comerford.